Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Wow, we're already here at November's Roundup of 2017. I can't believe that this year has gone so quickly. This will also be the penultimate video of the year for Deep Cuts. Next week I'm going to be doing my best albums of 2017. That'll be a list of 20 albums like I did last year, which I'm very excited to do. After that I won't be doing any more videos for the rest of the year, simply because I've got so much other work to be doing. I've got 3 research papers to write, I have a dissertation to put together, so Deep Cuts has to take a little bit of a back seat for now, but I will be back. After next week I'll be back again in January as normal with more videos, but yeah, it'll be a little bit up and down over the next few months just because I have to try and juggle these 2 different things. Before I jump into it, and yes, I'll be doing Utopia first because it's by far the most anticipated of this month, I've set up a Ko-fi page. Those of you that don't know, Ko-fi is this new platform where creators can go set up a page, and it's a place where fans of the channel or the creator can go and donate a little bit of money from time to time to keep the creator going, essentially. It's like a little donation place. It's a bit like a Patreon, but there's no sort of monthly incentive or anything. It's just if you want to throw a couple of pounds my way to keep Deep Cuts going, then that's great. And the reason I set it up is because a lot of you have come to me in the past and said, look, I'd like to support Deep Cuts in that way, and there's not really been any way that I've been able to organise it. So this is a way that you can do that. So if you feel like occasionally throwing a bit of money towards Deep Cuts to keep it going, I'm greatly appreciative, but don't feel like you have to, of course. You know, just watching these videos is support for me, and it's fantastic that you're doing that, so thank you for that. If you do want to do it, there's a link below in the description, and it takes you to my Ko-fi page. Right then, time to start with the big one. Björk, Utopia. So, it's finally here, Björk's follow-up to the 2015 heartbreaking Volnicura, titled Utopia. It feels like it's been a long road to get here, I think specifically because I've just been working through her entire discography for the guide, but we are finally here. And what do I think? Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful hearing Björk creating new music once again, music that's full of life and beauty in the way that Björk's music always is. It's evocative moments that flutter around inside your head days after you've listened to these tracks. After spending a good couple of weeks with Utopia, my thoughts are that this record sits proudly alongside the latter records of Björk's discography. Albums like Volnicura, Biophilia, less so Volta because it's my least favourite Björk record, but I think it does sit proudly in this pantheon of Björk's work. And yes, I think at times it does have its problems. I think 71 minutes is pushing it in terms of its length. It gets a little bit tiring towards the end, and perhaps shaving a little bit of time off of that, maybe a couple of tracks here or there, would have made it a little bit tighter. But overall, the feeling is that once again, Björk's created something that's very unique. It's got a very unique palette and a sonic identity. And how many people can you say are doing that 3 decades into their career? Electronic musician and producer Arca has returned to work on this record with Björk. Of course, he was a big part of Volnicura, but he did only come in after the songs were written to add flavour on top of it. And this time, Björk and Arca worked closely together from the ground up on this album. And it's very clear that his influence is seeping into this music, as I think Björk wanted it to. Check out the opening track, Arisen My Senses, probably one of my favourite tracks on the album. And it bursts with clattering percussive beats and deep bass notes, and converges with this bird song and of course Björk's ever transformative voice. In fact, it's an unbelievably strong opening for this record, and the lyrics itself as well. I'll read some of them. So, just that kiss was all there is, every cell in my body lined up for you, legs a little open once again. This layered opening is one of my favourite Björk tracks of the last 3 records, hands down. Next track, Blissing Me, shows off the relationship between Arca and Björk's musical stylings a little bit more than even the first track did. You've got Katie Buckley's lilting harp work, which is beautiful and a reminder of early harp moments on Björk's records. It's an instrument she enjoys utilising in her sonic palette. You have these harp sounds alongside Björk's layered vocals, which are light and airy. Again, there's that light and airy texture to this album, and you have Arca's skittering percussion that just layers across the entire track, and it gives this kind of sonic duality to the entire album. There's the dark skittering electronic beats, you've got the light and airy acoustic and naturalistic instrumentation. Gives it just a really interesting sound. The title track Utopia introduces another key prominent feature to this record, which is flutes. So Björk actually hired a flute ensemble to work on a lot of the tracks on this record, and it becomes a big part of the sound of Utopia. And it's also a big part of what gives the album that light, airy quality, because it's a breathy, toned instrument. However, Personally, I feel that as you journey through to the back of the album, those flutes become just a little bit tiresome, a little bit heavy-handed. Take a track like Courtship, for example. So the flutes don't just play a core part instrumentally, but also in the production as well. And they're so high up in the mix of this track that I feel like they're almost distracting. They become the main part of the track, and I feel like they are competing with Björk's vocals, which you don't want. Björk's vocals are the centerpiece, and I want to hear those more than anything else. And I feel like instead of accompanying, it feels like that competition just doesn't quite work within the track. Again, it's one of those marriages that works in moderation, but becomes a little bit distracting if it's pushed too far. You know, on the track Sue Me, for example, the flutes flutter in the verse to give away to this more electronic, glitchy beat that Ark has clearly produced, and that works really well. On Saint, the flute melody is stunning. It soars gloriously. What a beautiful melodic motif, and it will be stuck in your head for days after you've heard it. But I can't help but feel it would have been a little bit more impactful if we hadn't had so many flute-centric tracks leading up to it. I don't think the running time particularly helps either. 71 minutes is quite a long time for a record, and I think it needs to justify that time. And I feel like the sounds on here are beautiful, that sonic duality is lovely, could have easily created a well-crafted, tight album that's about 45 minutes long. If you look at things like Homogenic, Vespertine, Post, they don't outstay their welcome. And while I don't want to say that about Utopia, it does feel a little bit tired towards the end. It feels like quite a slog to listen to this album start to finish, and I feel like just shaving a few tracks out of the middle would have really tightened up this album. So yeah, I do have some problems with it, but perhaps I'm being a little bit too harsh. I still really like this album. I think there's a gorgeous sonic palette here. The work that Ark has done alongside Björk here is really nice. The lyrical content's great as always. She's put everything into this album, as she always does, which I admire so greatly. And tracks like Saint, Arisen My Senses, Tabula Rasa, they're going to be stuck in my head for a long time, and I'm going to be returning to this album a lot as well. Of course, I'm interested in seeing what you guys think of Utopia, especially coming off the back of all the comments on the Björk guide, so please let me know in the comment section down below. Converge, The Dusk in Us. I always get apprehensive just before Converge release a new record, because they're one of the most consistent metalcore, mathcore, hardcore bands around, and they've put out a slew of fantastic records this century. I always feel the next record will be a little bit by the numbers, something that I feel happened with Dillinger Escape Plan's last two records, One of Us is the Killer and Dissociation. Not bad records per se, but not really pushing the boat out much, and probably the most typical of the Dillinger releases, and I don't want that to happen to Converge. I don't want them to slip into a similar kind of samey record. The Dusk in Us is a follow-up to 2012's All We Love We Leave Behind, which is a stellar record, and for anybody who's interested in intense, heavy music should definitely listen to. Whilst I don't think The Dusk in Us hits the very high highs of its predecessor, it's a really, really good record. It might be my album of the month. These boys from Boston have been going for 27 years, and they still have so much fire in them, so much anger and energy, and that propulsive focus sets every single track on this album alight. And it's really delivered through Jacob Bannon's ever-anguished vocals. You have Ben Coller's seismic drumming. The drumming on this is so good. Kurt Ballou and Nate Newton's barraging guitar riffs. If you've listened to Converge before, you'll be aware of this, but for those of you that haven't, as they've matured as a band, they've begun to take that brutal, knotty songwriting and quite mathy at times as well, and discover the ability to create atmosphere, so pulling back at times in order to do that, occasionally holding back the propulsive energy for the sake of mood and atmosphere creating. Marrying the blisteringly technical with this connected emotion is what made their records so great over the last few years, and The Dusk in Us proves that they're on the same path with that, with the opening track A Single Tear. As with previous albums, the production is fat with a, PH, proper fat. The drum fills are satisfyingly panned, Bannon's vocals sit squarely in the center of the mix, surrounded by those slicing guitar riffs. Archipov Calm is probably my favorite track on the album, and it's also the mathiest track here, which probably reveals my love for mathcore, math rock, all those styles, all that kind of intense, knotty kind of songwriting. Their use of dynamics here is what gives the track such a punch. There's one section that pulls back with these ghost snares, and then you have these interjecting guitar and bass lines, and Bannon's vocal delivery is just pushed to the very limit. And it's the ability to create the technical stuff alongside dynamics and emotive weight that really just makes this band so powerful to listen to. The title track, The Dusk in Us, pulls things even further back. You have this clean guitar line and what you could maybe describe as crooning from Bannon. I mean, it's not really crooning, but it's a clean singing voice, which is not something that you hear throughout the rest of the album. And it's a stylistic switch up from the rest of the record, but again, it works. And when it does eventually build, because it's a 7-minute track, and it builds this melancholic atmosphere to this halftime crescendo, which is beautifully realised and so brutal as it gets to that moment, because you've had the build-up, the anticipation of it, and it's just so well articulated by this band, and it's another example that they're just continuing to refine their craft as they age and mature. Listen to this. Morrissey, Low in High School. Problematic Morrissey. I think it's fair to say that arrival of a new album, Low in High School, has been somewhat overshadowed by some of the choice comments Morrissey's made in the media over the past few years and the last few weeks specifically, something that's become a big part of his public persona, unfortunately. Belittling sexual abuse victims, showing support for Nigel Farage and Brexit, calling China a subspecies. These are all true, by the way, these all happened. He doesn't make it easy for people to like him, does he? He might have said over the past few years that he's been misquoted by a lot of these magazines. They're claiming he's saying these things, but it's funny how all these magazines seem to be misquoting him all the time. It's almost actually as if those magazines are actually just quoting exactly what he said, and he doesn't really like the backlash. Now, it would have been really nice to go into this review without mentioning Morrissey's public persona or his combative opinions, but unfortunately it's difficult not to do that when that persona lives in his songwriting these days. It's very much part of his songcraft and his identity, both musically and outside of music as well, and you can hear it when you listen to this album. It's these combative opinions and old man anger that seeps out of Low in High School. It has this puerile, tasteless ugliness about it that comes out not just in the lyrical content, but in the music itself. Probably best understood through the 7-minute track I Bury the Living, I think, which is this plodding, baggy instrumentation that sort of flaps around Morrissey as he half croons and half spits these venomous lyrics about soldiers and the nature of war. I'll read a couple of lines out. I carry out the powerful Vulgarian view. I scatter glue. Do as I say or I scatter you. Give me an order, I'll blow up a border. Give me an order and I'll blow up your daughter. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think these topics shouldn't be being discussed, especially in music, because I think music's a very powerful communication tool. So people should be talking about politics in music and in art as well. But Morrissey communicates them with this blunt and direct force, and not in a way that feels honest or enlightening, but just in a way that feels like the ramblings of a dogmatic idiot. Another thing that's really switched me off 21st century Morrissey is the uninspired instrumentation, and it's here in spades on Low in High School. You've got this saccharine, cheesy string line on Jackie's Only Happy When She's on Stage, that broad, flabby, generic rock swagger on the opening track, My Love, I'd Do Anything For You. Just a dull, grim sounding track. It kind of sounds like Muzak at times, and that repugnant synth sound that they use on Who Will Protect Us From the Police. Just all the sounds on this album just did nothing for me at all. Some people have said that the track Jackie is actually politically charged and it's about Morrissey's feelings on Brexit, his pro-Brexit stance. He's actually said that this is not correct and people are misunderstanding his lyrics. But this is what happens when you put that sort of radical public persona into your writing and you let it become your identity. People end up reading into everything, even if that's not what the song means. And every time you pop out of your dogmatic molehill to spout shite, that's what's going to happen, really. It's going to affect people's interpretations of your work. Even without those views, though, I wouldn't like this record one bit. Ugly, uninspired, cynical, bad. Baths, Romaplasm. I have a little bit of a strained relationship with the music of Baths. It's the project of electronic musician and producer Will Weisenfeld. I find my reaction to his bubbly, fairly esoteric songs entirely based on my mood at the time of hearing them. So if I'm feeling brooding or pissed off, then that kind of playful lucidity of his music just irks me. His vulnerable, innocent, childlike voice will just completely turn me off. Yet catch me in the right mood, and Bath's previous records and his brand new LP Romaplasm sings, gloriously. I can't think of another artist whose music is quite so dependent on mood to be enjoyed, certainly personally anyway, but that's definitely the experience that I've had with Bath's music and with Romaplasm as a record. Romaplasm continues down the melodic journey begun by Will's first record, Cerulean, and then the follow-up, 2013's Obsidian. I think I preferred Cerulean as a record. It had darker moments. It wasn't quite so sort of bouncy and vibrant, but the vibrancy factor on Romaplasm is increased twofold from Obsidian. It's almost technicolor. It pops so much more, which, as I've already said, will work for me or flat out not work dependent on my mood. And I wasn't really going to mention that much in this review, but I do think it raises some really interesting questions about the nature of criticism and subjectivity and mood as well based on music, and I'd be really keen to see what you guys think about this. Are there any albums you guys listen to that you feel you have to be in exactly the right mood to enjoy it, especially sort of bouncy, technicolor, vibrant albums in the vein of Bath? So can you listen to them when you're pissed off, and will they pick you up, or will you just be pissed off still and they'll just annoy you? Let me know in the comment section. Back to Romaplasm anyway. I think if you're a fan or an enthusiast of electronic music, like myself, you'll enjoy this record. Not with anywhere near the same kind of density or intensity, but this album kind of reminds me of Igloo Ghost's newest record, Near Wax Bloom, that I reviewed last month, because you find yourself delighting in some of the arcane sounds and textures that Bath utilises throughout this record, much in the same way that Igloo Ghost does, and it just creates these, at times, twee pop songs with very interesting sounds, and you might find yourself geeking out, like, oh, that's a really interesting sound, there's a nice texture there. That's kind of the way I approached this record. A track like Abscond, for example, has these climbing strings alongside bubbling synth lines and a gentle four-to-the-floor sample. I think even catching me in the right mood, though, by the time you reach the end of the record, the insistent bubbliness of the record might become a little bit tiring to you, might come just a little, get a bit of fatigue setting in, because it's the same tone throughout the entire album. You know, tracks like One Form or I Form and Superstructure, it feels a little bit uninspired and almost a bit like afterthoughts compared to the opening 4 to 5 tracks. If you're a fan of tight electronic production and pop songwriting, then give this record a listen, because it is a good record in the right frame of mind. Electric Wizard, Wizard Bloody Wizard. New album from Dorset-based doom metal band Electric Wizard, the band that idolises Black Sabbath more than any other band that's ever existed, ever. Electric Wizard, if you haven't heard of them, you haven't watched my doom metal video, tut tut, they put out a masterpiece in 2000 called Dope Throne, which is a high watermark in the world of metal, and specifically this subgenre of metal, which is sludgy, slow doom. And since that album was released, the subsequent albums have just really been derivations of the same sound, though diminishing in quality every single time. In fact, to be honest, I don't even know how fair that is as a criticism against the band and the music that they're making, because in a genre like doom, there's very little you can do to push the boundaries of that sound. All doom sounds very similar. I know there are subgenres within doom, there's funeral doom, there's stoner doom, there's all sorts of different ones, but if you're looking at this kind of classic Sabbath worshipping doom sound that Electric Wizard are making, there's very little you can do to push the boundaries out before it's not really doom metal. I mean, Pallbearer are a band that are doing the doom sound, but they're making it sound consistently fresh. There's elements of prog in there, it just lightens up the sound a little bit and experiments with that, and I think they're creating some really good records, and they released Heartless this year, their third LP, which is a very good album. Comparatively, an album like Wizard Bloody Wizard just sounds so tired. It's just like a tired copy of old doom records. All the hallmark tropes are there, of course. You have fuzzed out guitars, slow riffs, you have vocalist Just Osborne snarling like an Aussie tribute act. It's just difficult not to switch off, something I found myself pretty much immediately doing going into the second track, realising that there's nothing inherently wrong with this album, but there's also nothing that's new or interesting being offered. You know, I've heard this sound loads of times before. I can just go and listen to any other number of really good doom metal records that have already been released. Hint, hint, go watch the video. Then again, I guess that's what you're expecting when you're jumping into another Electric Wizard album. They aren't about reinventing the wheel, they're about creating filthy riffs you can bang your head to. But it's just never felt as tired and derivative as it does here. Yaeji, EP2. This might just be a short little 18-minute EP, but it's something I've listened to over and over again in November, so I really wanted to talk about it. Kathy Yaeji Lee is a Brooklyn resident making ethereal, deep house music, jumping from English to Korean vocals, delivered via all sorts of expressions from rapping to evocative whispers. Yaeji has really built on her first EP, something I didn't find particularly engaging, I've got to be honest, but these 5 tracks here are such a strong indication of her talent, the ability to harness so much intimacy and fun into that framework of bass-heavy house and pop music. The trap sounds on Drink I'm Sipping On fluently accompany these Korean vocals, and if you're capable of listening to this without grooving to it, you're broken as a person. Sorry to inform you. The absolute banger, Rain Girl, is what put me onto this EP in the first place, actually. This woozy club track that kind of disorients with its sub-bass and its flighty synth lines. Yaeji's delivery here is kind of languid. It draws from hip-hop tropes, but she really makes it her own. It's almost like this kind of post-hip-hop, post-house song. It's really infectious. And again, if you don't groove to this track, then you're objectively broken. The track after that really proves her capability as a producer. She layers up these sounds to create a groggy, swirling soundscape. Final track, Passion Fruit, is a reworking of the track from his More Life record, or mixtape, or whatever you want to call it, and it takes those tropical stylings of the original and it makes it 10 times better, I think. You know, the hazy approach that Yaeji has to her production works so much better than that overproduced 40 production sound on Drake's records. Very short, but very sweet. This is a brilliant EP, and I'm really excited to see what else is in store for Yaeji. The Body and Full of Hell, Ascending a Mountain of Heavy Light. Okay, let's imagine Converge isn't enough of an oral assault for you. You want something a lot more despicable, jagged, abrasive. Enter Ascending a Mountain of Heavy Light, the second collaborative album between the bands The Body and Full of Hell. So a bit of a background first. We have the grindcore band Full of Hell from Maryland, who fuse grindcore and power violence to create an extreme assault on your little ears. They've done collaborations with noise legend Merzbow in the past. They know how to create a racket. And we have The Body, a sludge metal band from Rhode Island who've been going since I think 1999. Much of their own music has a more experimental noise identity than traditional sludge metal does, so it really does mix those genres up a little bit. So based on those two descriptions, you would imagine this band are capable of creating quite an almighty racket, and that is exactly why Ascending a Mountain of Heavy Light is so damn good. This album is 34 minutes long, which I think is the perfect length to have your head smashed around for, taking in this volley of glitching distortion, tortured screams, electrifying feedback and pummeling drums. Yeah, this likely won't be for everybody. To both bands' testament, it's a surprise this album's even listenable at all, to be quite honest with you. You know, for all of my hyperbolic synonym usage, one of the strongest things about this album is its ebb and flow. It's a bit like what I was talking about with the dynamic quality of Converge's record. They know when to pull back and when to go for a menacing soundscape, when to fully go for it and attack you as a listener. They know when to do these things, and that's why this album is such a great experience to listen to. The opening track, Light Penetrates, has this jittery, almost glittering electronic line, imposing drums scattered across before we get our first sludgy drone chord that imposingly just smashes in. Two sounds that kind of feel like they would be at odds with each other, yet it's just so exciting to hear them unfold together in this way. Track Didn't End the Night has this power violence drum sample that underpins the entire track, and then you have the Body vocalist Chip King's screams that stutter and glitch alongside this despicable soundscape. There's something weirdly hypnotic about the digital breakdown of this record, and I think it's something you find when you do listen to the power violence subgenre and this kind of noise music subgenre. It sounds as if it's literally breaking down in your ears, and like the distortion gets to the point where you can hear the individual. It almost sounds like you can hear pixels. That's the only way I can really describe it, and that might not make sense particularly. In my head, it kind of makes sense. Really listen to this album and see if you can hear that. In a similar way, if you've ever listened to Tim Hecker's Rave Death 1972, he operates his soundscapes in a way that breaks things down digitally. But obviously with this album, there's heaps more malice to it. So two very different sounding records, but with a similar approach to the kind of digital distortion, digital dilapidation. I think this is a great record. It has a lot to offer, and I think if you're one of those people who likes an album that literally blows the cobwebs halfway down the road, then yeah, this is for you. King Gizzard, Snore or something. So guys, we have the fourth, yeah, that's that, the fourth King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard record in 2017, Polygondwanaland, I think that's what it's called. They've taken an innovative approach with the release of this record, so they're not doing any other kind of gimmicks this time, like with the microtones or the collabs with the terribly bland bands, like Mile High Club or whatever they were called. I just don't even retain information about this band anymore. So this time, they're giving the album away for free, so you can do what you like with it. So basically, you can put it on a tape if you like, you could press it onto an LP, you could sell it, you could do whatever you like. What a gift. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to actually press Polygondwanaland onto this old potato. Because, you know, I think it'll sound better, if anything. So if you'd like to order a copy of this Polygondwanaland on potato, you know, just let me know. Just another yawn-worthy King Gizzard release, and apparently we have another one this year, so can't wait for that. Thank you for watching my November Roundup. I'll be back next week with my albums of 2017, a list of 20 albums that I have loved this year. I'm excited to unveil that. There's definitely some albums I haven't spoken about this year in my review roundup, so probably a few surprises in there. Some things that won't be surprises based on how much I've loved certain records so far this year, so you can probably guess a few of them. But yeah, hope you'll join me for that one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.